Hello, everyone. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me where you're listening from. Now settle in, the darkness has a story for you. I'm writing this from my apartment in Seattle, 37th floor. Every window covered, every door locked. It's December 5th, and in 6 hours, something is coming for me. I need to explain how I got here, how I marked myself. Because if you ever find yourself in the Austrian Alps in early December, you need to know the rules. You need to understand what happens when you break them. 3 weeks ago, I was at a work conference in Salzburg. Boring corporate stuff. When it ended, I had a choice: fly home or use up the vacation days I was about to lose. Home meant my empty apartment and nothing to do. So I rented a cabin in the mountains instead. Figured I'd finally get some peace and quiet. Stupid decision. The worst decision I ever made. The drive from Salzburg to Heiligenblut took 4 hours through mountain roads that made my rental car shudder and whine. But the landscape was worth it. Pine forests so heavy with snow the branches bent under the weight. Peaks that looked like they'd been carved from marble by some giant hand. Air so clean and cold it made my chest ache in a good way. Heiligenblut itself was barely a village. Maybe 200 people. The kind of place where the church is the tallest building, and everyone probably knows everyone else's business going back 3 generations. I stopped at the general store for supplies: wine, bread, cheese, coffee, some pasta and sauce. Basic survival food. The woman behind the counter was elderly, 70 at least. Weathered face, gray hair pulled back severely, hands that looked like they'd spent decades working. She rang up my items without comment, but when I handed her my credit card, she looked at my face. Really looked. Her expression changed. She said something in rapid German. I caught maybe 1 word in 5. My high school German was nearly useless, and it had been 20 years anyway. I heard Morgen, tomorrow, and house, and something that sounded urgent. I smiled apologetically, shrugged. She frowned, tried again more slowly. Still too fast for me. I shook my head, feeling that particular embarrassment of being a tourist who can't speak the language. She looked frustrated, said something else, pointing at me, then at the mountains, then made a gesture like closing a door. Stay inside, maybe? Was that what she was trying to say? I nodded like I understood, thanked her in terrible German, and left. Local superstitions, I figured. Mountain towns are full of them. Don't go out during full moons. Don't whistle at night. That sort of thing. The cabin was perfect, small but beautifully maintained. The listing had a 18th century authentic alpine experience, which usually means uncomfortable and cold, but someone had clearly put work into it. Modern heating, good insulation, a massive stone fireplace that looked original to the building, thick wooden beams across the ceiling, windows with heavy shutters, the kind meant for serious weather. The view from those windows was stunning. The cabin sat on a slope overlooking the valley, pine trees marching down steep hillsides, mountains in the distance going purple and gold in the late afternoon light. The nearest building was an old barn, maybe 200 meters downslope, dark and abandoned. I unpacked slowly, enjoying the silence. Silence, real silence. Not the white noise of traffic or the hum of air conditioning or the distant sound of neighbors through apartment walls. Just wind in the pines and my own breathing. I made pasta for dinner. poured wine into a glass that wasn't from IKEA, sat in an armchair that was old enough to be genuinely comfortable rather than artfully distressed, started a fire in the fireplace, opened a book I'd been carrying around for 6 months. My phone had no signal, no bars at all. I'd known it would be like this. The listing had mentioned it. But seeing those empty bars felt like freedom. No emails, no Slack notifications, no text from my mother asking if I was eating enough vegetables. Just me and the fire, and a book. This was exactly what I needed. I read until my eyes got heavy. The fire had burned down to coals. The wine bottle was half empty. I felt more relaxed than I had in months. Years, maybe. I was just considering heading upstairs to bed when I heard the bells. Faint at first. Distant. Multiple bells ringing somewhere down in the valley. Different tones, different sizes, jangling against each other with no melody. Just noise, like sleigh bells. But wrong somehow. Too many of them. No rhythm. I set down my book and went to the window. Down in the village, maybe a kilometer away, I could see lights. Torches, it looked like. Little points of flame moving through the darkness. A group of people walking up from the village center. Some kind of festival. I watched with mild interest. The torches moved slowly, steadily. The bells got gradually louder. That jangling, chaotic sound echoed up through the valley. Then I started to make out shapes. People in the torchlight. But they looked wrong. Too tall. Some of them had to be on stilts. They were 9, 10 feet high. Dark and shaggy. Horned. Moving with a strange, lurching walk. The bells came from them. I could see them now. Large cowbells hanging from their waists, swinging with each step. And underneath the bells, another sound. Chains. Heavy chains dragging on pavement. I felt something tighten in my chest. This is just tradition, I told myself. Alpine villages do this. Folk customs. Parades. Nothing unusual. Probably something to do with Christmas. The Germans have all sorts of weird Christmas traditions. The procession reached the edge of the village, started up the mountain road, the road that led to my cabin. I stepped back from the window. They were probably just following the route. The road continued past my cabin, led to other houses higher up the mountain. No reason to think they were coming here specifically. But my heart was beating faster now, and my hands felt cold. The bells grew louder, much louder. I stood in the middle of my living room, listening to them approach, telling myself this was fine. This was normal. This was just local color. The sound of the bells changed. Less echo. They weren't on the road anymore. They were closer. I went back to the window and immediately wished I hadn't. The procession had stopped in the clearing directly in front of my cabin. 20 figures, maybe more, standing in a rough semicircle, all facing my house, completely motionless. The torchlight illuminated them clearly. The costumes were elaborate, too elaborate. Dark fur, matted and stained, covering bodies that looked too large, too angular to be human. Wooden masks carved into faces frozen in expressions of rage and hunger and something worse. Something that looked like anticipation. Horns, some small and pointed like goat horns, others massive and branching like elk antlers. Chains wrapped around their torsos and limbs. Old iron that looked like it had been underground for centuries. And those cowbells, dozens of them, silent now, but somehow more threatening in their silence. Each figure carried a basket, large woven baskets on their backs, empty baskets. I felt sweat on my palms despite the cold. My breath was coming faster. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. The stillness, the way they all faced exactly the same direction. The silence after all those bells. One of the figures at the front, taller than the others, with massive curving horns, tilted its head, slowly, deliberately, looking directly at my window, looking directly at me. Then it raised one arm, pointed at my house with fingers that were too long. The others began to move, not toward the door. They spread out around the cabin in perfect coordination, like they'd done this 1,000 times before. I heard them at the windows, scraping sounds, hands or claws or something worse, dragging across glass, testing it, looking for weakness. My throat had gone completely dry. I backed away from the window, nearly tripping over the armchair. This was a prank. Had to be a prank. Elaborate hazing. For tourists stupid enough to rent isolated cabins. That was all, but my body wasn't listening to my rational mind. My hands were shaking. My legs felt weak. Every animal instinct I had was screaming danger. Something heavy slammed against the side of the cabin. The impact rattled the windows. Then another slam from a different direction. Another. They were hitting the walls, testing them, and I could hear wood creaking under the impacts. I ran to the front door, checked the deadbolt. Locked. Ran to the back door through the kitchen. Also locked. My phone was on the counter where I'd left it. I grabbed it with shaking hands. No signal. Still no signal. No way to call anyone. No way to get help. The scraping at the windows was everywhere now, all around the cabin. Long, slow drags that made my skin crawl. And underneath it, a new sound. Breathing. Heavy, wet breathing from multiple sources. Like dogs panting, but deeper. Wronger. I moved back to the front window and immediately regretted it. One of them was pressed against the glass, its face inches from mine, separated only by the window. The wooden mask was close enough that I could see every detail. The grain of the wood, soot stains around the nostrils, dark stains near the mouth that could have been old blood. The eye holes were deep and dark, but something moved behind them. Something that caught the torchlight and reflected it back with an animal brightness. It was looking at me, not at the window, not at the house, at me specifically, with intelligence, with recognition, with hunger. Glass shattered in the kitchen. The sound made me jump, made a small sound escape my throat that I'm not proud of. They were inside. They were actually inside my cabin. I ran for the stairs. Didn't think. Just ran. Took the stairs 3 at a time. Into the bedroom. Slammed the door and locked it. Useless. The lock was just a basic button lock. Wouldn't stop anyone determined. I grabbed the dresser and dragged it in front of the door. It was old and heavy, and my hands were slipping on the wood, but I got it in place. Downstairs, I heard them moving, multiple footsteps, heavy, and that breathing, that wet, labored breathing. And underneath it all, voices, low voices speaking in a language I didn't recognize. German, maybe, but old, guttural, wrong. The footsteps started up the stairs, slow footsteps, methodical, one at a time, with that same lurching rhythm I'd seen in their walk, and chains dragging across the wood, scraping with each step. The cowbells started again, jangling softly. I pressed my back against the far wall. My chest felt like it was being crushed. I couldn't get enough air. This isn't real, I thought. This can't be real. People don't do this. This doesn't happen. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs, moved down the short hallway, stopped outside my door. Complete silence, no breathing, no bells, nothing. Then 3 knocks, Heavy, deliberate. The door shook in its frame and the dresser scraped forward an inch. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, just stood there with my back against the wall, shaking, staring at that door. 3 more knocks. Harder. The dresser scraped forward another few inches. Then the voice came. Deep, speaking German. I didn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. Commanding. Demanding. The dresser scraped across the floor. Not being pushed, being lifted. I heard it rise off the ground, heard wood scraping against wood as it moved aside by itself, and then the door opened. The figure that entered had to duck through the doorframe. Its horns, massive branching antlers, scraped across the ceiling, leaving gouges in the plaster. In the dim light from outside, I could see it clearly. This wasn't a costume. Couldn't be. The proportions were all wrong. The body under that matted fur was too large, too angular. The arms hung too low, ending in hands that were too long, fingers tipped with what looked like actual claws. The chains wrapped around it were ancient iron, thick and heavy, the metal stained and pitted. The basket on its back was woven from birch branches, and inside I could see cloth, small pieces of cloth, children's clothing. It looked at me with eyes that weren't human, eyes that reflected light like a cat's, but larger, more intelligent, filled with something that looked like satisfaction. It reached out one massive hand toward me. From somewhere down in the valley, a bell rang. Different from the cowbells, higher, clearer, the church bell. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The figure froze. Its hand stopped centimeters from my face. I could feel the cold radiating from it, could smell something like rot and old earth. Its head turned sharply toward the sound of the bell. The church bell kept ringing, 6 chimes, clear and insistent in the night air. The hand withdrew, slowly. The figure stepped back, turned, had to duck again to get through the doorway. I heard it descend the stairs with that same lurching gait. Heard the others moving too. Heard chains and bells as they filed out of my cabin. Heard them gathering outside. Heard them moving back down the mountain, the sounds gradually fading. I stayed pressed against that wall until dawn, until gray light finally came through the window, until I heard birds, normal sounds, real sounds. Around 9, someone knocked on the door. Normal knocking, human knocking. I almost didn't answer, but the knocking continued, patient and gentle, and finally I went downstairs. The woman from the store stood on my doorstep. She'd brought someone with her, a younger man, maybe 40, with a kind face. He spoke English, introduced himself as her grandson, said she'd been worried about me, said she'd tried to warn me yesterday, but I hadn't understood. December 5th, he said. Krampusnacht, the night when Krampus walks. An old tradition. Very old. Older than Christianity, though the church had tried to tame it. Tried to make it into something less than what it was. The rules are simple, he said. You must stay inside. You must not be visible, must not watch from windows, because if Krampus sees you, if he marks you as a witness, then you become part of his procession. Not this year. The church bells protect you on the first night. But next year, he comes for you before the bells ring, before there's any protection. I'd been at the window. They'd seen me. His grandmother said something in German. He translated, I should leave Austria, should not come back in winter, because I'd been noticed, marked, and Krampus has existed for 1,000 years, has walked these mountains since before there were villages, has a memory longer than human lifespans. They helped me pack, drove me to the village. I left the rental car there, called the company, said it broke down, paid the fee, took a taxi to Salzburg, flew home that same day. I tried to forget, tried to convince myself it had been some kind of mass hallucination, stress and wine and isolation. But I couldn't explain the scratches on my windows. I couldn't explain the broken glass in the kitchen. Couldn't explain the bruises on my arms where the dresser had scraped me as it moved by itself. 3 weeks ago, something arrived at my apartment. A manila envelope with no return address, postmarked from Austria. Inside was a photograph. It showed me standing at the cabin window, taken from outside looking in. The date stamp read December 5th, last year. I recognized everything. My shirt, the wine glass in my hand, the book on the chair behind me, and in the window's reflection, barely visible behind my own image, there was something else, a shape, tall, horned, watching me with eyes that caught the camera flash and threw it back like an animal's. On the back, someone had written in careful handwriting, December 5th, 2025. We are coming. That's tonight. I'm in my apartment in Seattle now, 37th floor. Every window covered, every lock checked 3 times. I called in sick to work, told my friends I have the flu. I'm not leaving, not opening the door. Not until December 6th, when it should be safe. But an hour ago, I heard something. Bells, faint, distant, but getting closer. And I'm starting to think that 37 floors might not be high enough.